is non-executive director, of an organisation that has a contract under the work programme.
Okay. Right. Apologies to everybody who was kept outside for the private session. Can I just talk about rules of engagement so that we're all clear where we are? I would appreciate, particularly given the time, that the questions are answered directly and succinctly, and I will only interrupt if I feel that that's not what's happening. If we're going off what we're trying to establish. So that's the first thing to say. And then let me also say absolutely clearly that this inquiry isn't about challenging the policy, government's policy around welfare to work. It is about satisfying ourselves as a committee that you are providing value for money, and the way that the department administers the government policies provides proper probity. And you, Mr. Devereux, as the accounting officer, clearly have an overwhelming duty both around value for money and as the guardian of the public purse, which I think you would agree. So I'm going to start, really, by, I sent you a whole lot of documents when we had our earlier inquiry into the work programme. It started with work programme, though I've got to say to you that this actually talks about contracted employment programmes. It doesn't talk about the work programme. Just to be absolutely clear what we're on about this afternoon. I sent you a sample of emails and I sent you a copy of an A4E internal report, which the committee also have and which we are publishing. Now, in your response to me, in your letter to me, what you actually said was that the allegations didn't provide specific enough information to underpin an investigation. Can you explain to me what you meant by that?
Well,
and do you mind speaking up? Because it's a very odd room, I know, but earlier on I couldn't hear what you were saying.
What do I mean by that? As you know, I have professionally qualified investigators working for the department, and they deal with all manner of allegations and investigations. The first thing they need to do when confronted with an allegation is actually decide whether there's enough information contained within it in order to actually proceed with a proper investigation. Sadly, in the cases that you sent to me, it wasn't clear how they were going to do that, and that was their professional view.
Can I ask, are they qualified auditors and accountants, the people that you put onto this work?
Yes.
They all are?
Yes.
And then can I ask why you didn't choose to come back to me to seek further clarification if you needed, rather than simply putting it to one side and saying, well, I've done this one, I don't need to do any more, there isn't enough information here?
Well, pretty much at the same time as you sent me those individual allegations, you will remember the department announced it was doing a complete review of its contract with A4E, and so pretty much the same investigators went about doing a systematic, sampled-based inquiry of all of the contracts.
But these were in the A4E recruiter audit, in that particular document, they were pretty specific. What you said to me in your letter was that it didn't provide information specific enough to underpin an investigation. As I looked through that report, there are names of individuals, names of companies, names of recruiters. But that's not what I said. And that's why I can't understand why you felt that the information was not specific enough, and therefore you felt that you didn't have to take it any further, and you didn't come back to me except when I chased you on a letter.
Well, with respect, I was going to write to you, and I had a letter in draft at the point your letter came to me. I chose not to put that in the response because I thought that you might think I was making that up, but it was true. I've written you wrote to me two sets of things. I've given you two sets of answers. In respect of the set of individual allegations, the individual emails, I have indeed said there wasn't enough evidence there to do it. If you turn the page to the top paragraph of my letter about the internal audit report, I've made perfectly clear that there are cases there which we are indeed pursuing. So you're right. The internal audit report contains more information on which the investigators can buy. That is not the case in respect of the many
I was
emails.
I was very careful to redact people's individual details, but I didn't realise that you believed that that didn't give you enough information. And I just don't understand why you didn't come back to me to seek more information before saying, well, there's nothing in this that I need to pursue.
Well, because I was in the process of going through a systematic review of A4E's contracts consequent upon Chris Grayling's announcement.
I think that's, I understand you did that, and it's a good thing you did that, but I don't think that is an answer to why you chose not to take, in my view, as seriously as I would have liked, the allegations that I sent to you. I accepted a redacted form to protect the individual and simply said to me there wasn't information specific enough. I don't get it. I'm trying to get a real answer out of that. I mean, I would have appreciated your coming back to me and saying, this one, I don't think I've got enough. Have you got any more details? Could we contact the individual? They might, and in some cases I had permission from individuals so that you could have contacted them. And I would have also thought that that might have helped you uncover more of the systemic issues that, the allegations suggest exist within A4E.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry we didn't come back earlier. I have come back. I've asked you for that information now. You don't typically...
No, you haven't asked me for any information, actually, to be fair, Mr Devereux. All you've said is I didn't provide you with information specific enough to underpin an investigation.
I said,
and that struck to me...
I said, if you have been provided with any further specific details related to these cases,
maybe it would have been better...
we will, of course, consider them further.
Well, maybe it would have been better if your investigation officers had come and talked to me, rather than...
At the time, my investigation officers were doing a systemic check of what was going on in A4E. You do not get to systemic answers by looking at individual allegations. You do it by going through individual cases.
Part of doing a systemic check, Mr Devereux, is to take seriously individual allegations that, I didn't seek them out. They came to me unsolicited. And I would have thought if you were doing a systemic check, you would have taken seriously. Let me move on to something else.
Systemic means systematic, doesn't it?
It means systematic, but part of the way in which you do a systematic check is that you look at allegations that are put around a particular company. And I can't understand why the hell you didn't do that.
Clearly differ on the meaning of systematic. But I've asked you, if you have further information, then please let me know.
Well, perhaps your officials will come and see me so that we can go through the individual cases. Can I ask you a second thing on the dossier that I sent you? In this, the recruiter audit one, there are allegations of 9 defined by A4E. I would define it differently, but let's accept the A4E definition. There are allegations of 9 instances of fraud. I think some of the reputation to company issues could well be defined as fraud. A4E only told you about 3. What does that tell you about the company?
Well, as I understand it, A4E's view, but I am now checking it, which is why I'm telling you the paragraph at the top of the page. I'm going through every single one of those 9. A4E's view was that they had investigated it and there was no case. And so they thought they were telling me about the 3 which they had investigated and concluded there was a case to answer. All 3 related to one individual recruiter.
So the 9 cases that A4E themselves have said a potential fraud in their own internal document, they've now changed their mind on, is that right?
If you read the words carefully in that report, it says there may be fraud in these cases. So what A4E's position is, and I'm only repeating what they've told us, is they did further work consequent upon that review. They concluded that in 6 of the 9 cases there was not fraud, and so they told us of the 3 in which they concluded there was fraud.
At the time... What time was this? 2009. There's no question about 2008, 2009.
That report was started on the 16th of June 2009.
Yeah,
16th of July 2009.
There's no question about that. In 2009, when they had a report which suggested, again, 9 potential fraudulent cases, yes. They only told you about 3. There are further cases, if I can just say so, I have read this of document 9 in detail, which they classify as reputational risk, or they talk about unable to complete audit visit, but this is, instances where no doubt Richard Bacon will want to say where, employers didn't exist, didn't disappear, lap dancers, whatever have you. All those, to me, were potential fraud. You are quite happy to say that only 3, A4E, it tells you nothing about the company, is it?
I'm sorry. Let me just say it again. That report says they believe there could be fraud in 9 cases. A4E as a company believe they did further investigation to conclude only 3 of them were fraudulent.
And you're quite happy, are you, that
I am not quite happy, because my letter makes perfectly clear I am now reviewing every single one of those 9 cases and 5 other cases which, like you, we conclude that report gives us leave to do.
So you would agree that some that are so-called reputational risk, I mean, actually, a third of the cases have a problem with them. Some 7 that are reputational risks, some where they're unable to complete the audit visit.
So we are agreeing that we are going to look at those cases.
You're going to look at all the ones to date.
What I've told you in my letter. In that report, the 31% where issues were highlighted. I've told you in my letter that we currently think there are 11 cases that we are going to investigate. Okay. If you'd like me to tell you precisely which ones they are, I can do that.
Let me just ask you another one. In one case, again in your letter, you say you're not taking this any further because the employer has ceased trading. Is that right? That's in your letter to me.
Which one is that? Yes.
Okay, can I just remind you that the Public des Committee always does its work. We always examine past expenditure. That's the nature. In fact, 1 or 2 of our members occasionally accuse us of looking forward a little bit too much, but actually, basically, we focus on past expenditure. So I do feel a bit surprised that there's a Devereux rule, which is the only way I can express it, which says that if you go into liquidation, we're going to stop examining you. Is that, in fact, what you're saying to me?
Sorry, if the allegation is that Company X falsified records and Company X no longer exists... I
understand that, but you can still pursue the issue unless you have the Devereux rule, which says once a company goes into liquidation.
Thank you.
After the word liquidation.
After the word liquidation, the issue is what evidence can my investigators find?
Well, presumably that which the administrator has, because when companies go into liquidation, there's an administrator, or there is a receiver. I mean, they just don't disappear in smoke or go in a shredder.
Right, but I can't remember.
Not always, anyway.
I don't have to hand exactly which dates we're talking about, so I don't know what would have happened to the paperwork of that.
Yes, but the chair's point is the chair's point surely is the fact of a company's having gone into liquidation isn't a reason to stop investigating.
No, exactly. And it may be that my...
but that's what your letter to me says it is.
Okay, it may be that my prose is a bit spare, okay? Let me check with the investigator whether or not... I don't think this is a case that says, if you're stopped trading, we don't investigate you. I suspect this is shorthand for it stopped trading and we could not find any evidence. In the sense that I've just described.
So, it did go in the shredder.
Well, it might have done. I don't know. So let me check that for you.
Can I ask? Thank you for checking that for me. All I would say to you is that it's not acceptable to this committee to say just because a company has gone into liquidation, you fail to pursue an allegation of fraud.
Okay, but I've explained that I'm not trying to say that to you.
Okay. All right. Can I just? The committee would like to see, I think, the audit of A4E that you've completed. Can you? Let us have that, please.
Sorry, which
you
one?
have completed. The Minister made a statement to the House.
Yes.
And in it there was, you said, in fact, your letter to me, I've got so many bits of papers, maybe somebody can find your letter to me. In your letter to me, you say that you have completed I'll try and find the actual wording on it.
The Minister's statement says, if this helps, the Department's internal audit and investigation team undertook this audit, the audit that was announced in the light of allegations, supported by Ernst & Young, and examines the controls operated by A4E on all its current contracts with DWP.
So what my letter says is that we have provided in the absolutely normal fashion the completed version of the reports that we've done to the National Audit Office, which is standard practice. You may or may not have seen, but Mr McTaggart will have seen, the parliamentary question answer which the Secretary of State gave when it came back to the question of what's our policy on disclosing things to do with investigations, where at some length, and I apologise, it was a 3-page PQ answer, we tried to set out what are the thought processes that we go through in deciding what should be published and what should not be published when it comes to internal investigations. It's not that there's a balance to be had here between the public interest in transparency and the public interest in the ability to prosecute things successfully. And I suggest that actually that answer, 30th of April 2012, and that's the thing that
so
actually...
are you going to publish it? I don't understand that. I haven't seen this stuff on... was this a question?
It was a question...
I don't think we don't have that, so can you let us know whether you're going to publish it?
I will send it to you. I very much doubt we will publish it word for word, simply because it is not self-evident that the things that turn up in an internal investigation report, while I'm happy to share the National Audit Office, are actually sensible things to be put in the public domain.
Well, the only thing I would say to you is that, particularly in relation to A4E, which has excited a lot of public interest, if you don't publish it, you give an impression of apparent complacency, if I can put it like that. And, you know, this is a whole lot of good chaps. The chairman is an ex-permanent secretary, I understand, who no doubt you have conversation with. They're a big company.
No, I don't.
They've got, quite an expensive PR machine that we've seen in operation over the last few weeks. They're bound to be good citizens, so we don't need to have open and transparent oversight of them. Hang on a minute.
Maybe I can read out the answer then, if you're going to go down that. That is not the reason.
No, I want an answer to that.
Shall I read it out? It is not ordinarily appropriate to publicise the details of specific investigation cases. Disclosure of unproven allegations could result in litigation. Disclosure of specific cases where the investigation identifies evidence of procedural non-compliance, but not evidence of prima facie fraud, could impact on the willingness of providers or whistleblowers to bring matters to our attention. Premature disclosure of cases where there is evidence of prima facie fraud may potentially prejudice or damage future DWP or police investigations.
Can I just say that may not be normal, but given that what we're looking at is effectively undermining the bona fides of the whole work programme, which is a very significant issue, not just about the contractual arrangements and efficacy of one company. I would respectfully suggest that it would be helpful. Now, I know, Chair, that we also have, I gather, international law firm White and Case have also concluded, similarly with Ernst & Young, that there is substantially a clean bill of health. But I think for the department's own good standing, as well as our remit as a Value for Money Committee, I think that should be looked at respectfully again.
I understand that, and it is correct to say that, and if you heard what I said carefully, it said it is not ordinarily appropriate to publicise it. But can I just pick you up on what you just said, okay? Nothing that has been sent to my department gives me any evidence whatsoever that there is a problem with the work programme. Right,
we're not just talking about the work programme, Mr. Devereux. We will come to the work programme.
But your concerns are with the value for money today.
But we look back. This says...
The concerns are this report, and the report is called... If I can just finish. If I can just finish. The report is called Preventing Fraud in Contracted Employment Programmes, plural. So our concerns are, of course, the work programme, the present one that we saw you about in early February, but they are also, quite rightly, and that's what the NA report is about, other employment programmes as well.
There are indeed, but when your colleague says maybe my judgment about how I do this is dependent on assessing the bona fides of the work programme, I'm still waiting to see the evidence as the work programme
Well, we will
needs
come to the work
programme
programme later in this evidence session.
On this point...
No, wait a minute, I've got a queue. Matt, I have got a queue of people. Austin, then Meg, then Matt.
Mr. Devereux, this company A4E receives only British taxpayers' money for its operations in this area. So it does seem to me that while the law on freedom of information disclosure currently only applies to public bodies, that do you not think that there is a need for a higher level of transparency in a company of this nature?
I do. And there's nothing in the answer you'll see from the Secretary of State that tries to pretend that because they're at arm's length they're not covered by this. This is an issue to do with the nature of audit work and whether or not audit work must ordinarily be published. I've simply read out the answer. You asked me the question when I publish it. The answer at the moment is actually it is not ordinary. We don't ordinarily do it. We have not decided on what we're going to do with this report yet.
I think we covered the we have the argy-bargy about the audit, but isn't there just a bigger issue here about the types of organisations that the British government, through in this case the DWP, has contracts with?
Yes.
If this was a shareholder-owned company, publicly quoted, there would be shareholders' meetings, there would be transparency. We have in this case of this particular company, and I don't know what others across government, but this particular company, as an example, has one major shareholder. We have received evidence, and there's been a lot of stuff in the newspapers about its particular way of working. It doesn't have the same challenges as a publicly quoted company. And is it appropriate, do you think? And maybe you're straying into political territory, but there seem to me real issues here about providing contracts to a company that is not transparent and accountable when it only accepts and spends public taxpayers' taxpayers' money.
I think that's a perfectly reasonable challenge. I do think it matters. It does matter whether or not evidence has been found that this company is fraudulent. To date, all the evidence I have found is that it is not fraudulent. Now, the issue to do with whether or not in past contracts there has been poor practice on their part and others is a separate question for me, all right? Because at the moment I'm trying to establish whether or not I am at risk of fraudulent activity.
Can we just bring
in
it
my
back? Can we bring it
contract.
up to date? If you can look at page 32, in part 4 of the report, figure 11. Giving examples of alleged improper practice in the work programme. This came from the National Audit's Office examination of various correspondence received by the committee.
I'm sorry, I missed the paragraph.
Figure 11, page 32, in part 4 of the report. That gives an example of alleged improper practice. That's where the National Audit Office has gathered this from correspondence either sent to the committee or to individual members of the committee and passed to the NAO. And I'm not sure, maybe indeed from other sources. And then if we go to page 8 in the summary, we take paragraph 18. These are comments about how to improve things for the future. I mean, you say things were bad, or getting better, or we haven't got evidence to prove problems here. But it says here that the department does not systematically collect claimant feedback and complaints which could improve its awareness of the key areas where complaints consider they're getting a poor service. And if you go to paragraph 13 on page 8, just one of many examples, but I picked this one out, about some of the key controls don't apply to some of the smaller programmes. And it talks about outcomes, payment being made before outcomes have been achieved. Now, you tell us whether you think that applies to the work programme. But that altogether shows that there are real issues about how the department is following through information. And I wondered if you want to comment on that.
Okay, so this report contains two really quite different sections. There's a set of sections 1 to 3, which is about whether or not taxpayers' money is being paid on the wrong basis. There's another section, section 4, which is actually whether or not the levels of service are as we would expect them to be, given the policies.
Well, actually, as representing people in Hackney South and Shoreditch who go through the work programme, gone through other employment programmes, actually satisfaction of the claimant, them getting a job, seems to me absolutely linked to the value for money of taxpayers' money, because in the end they're going to be the taxpayers funding it in future.
So the simple distinction I'm making is this, that this government has chosen, having learnt the lessons of previous employment programmes, to nail its colours to well-defined outcomes and deliberately not sought to define the nature of the service standard which actually an individual claimant should receive. So in the New Deal programme, for example, we specified to within an inch of people's life what process somebody should go through. Actually, we weren't actually saying they will get a job, we were saying you will go through this process, 30 hours worth of work. All we're saying in the work programme now is that we will pay you if you get them into work, and you will tell us and you will publicise what levels of standards you're prepared to actually offer to your claimants. If these companies do not succeed in actually managing their claimants well and making sure they get into work, they will simply not make money.
I know you're very anxious to get onto the work programme. I think if I can just get some logic onto it. Can I get logic onto the inquiry? I think we need to look at what's happened in the past and then move to the future. So if we can do it that, because there are some questions I think we probably all have about the future. So let's just, I think what Meg was trying to ask you about was what is it in the record of a company that will make you decide that, I'm putting words in your mouth, Meg, but which will make you decide whether or not they are proper for engaging with government, whatever the contract. Just forget about the work programme for a moment. But what is it? You know, how do you define systemic? How much are you going to have to look at before you decide this is a company that it's not right that it should be receiving public money to provide a service to people?
Okay, well, if I take you to...
I think that's what she's saying.
Okay, if I take you to paragraph 2.6, what the National Audit Office has set out there is the 4 points that we sought to test bidders against when they bid for the most recent framework contract, and that is the framework from which all new and future employment programmes will come from. So, with apologies, it's the current position, it's not the past position. So the current position is, in order to get on to the framework from which work programme providers and indeed mandatory work activity people were provided, they had to demonstrate these 4 things.
And what about the record of a company?
Well, in assessing this, we sought to put in place teams that actually knew about the interaction that was happening with individual departments.
Would you be prepared to provide the committee with evidence that A4E, for example, has in place a system for staff to report improper behaviour, a system of performance management systems which avoid perverse incentives? Because you heard the private evidence before us, which seemed quite compellingly to contradict both of those 2 things.
It did indeed, which is why, if I may repeat myself, you do need to be clinically clear about which period
That's why I'm asking if you would provide this committee with the evidence upon which you depended to decide they were a proper company.
Let me go and see. I can't see what would be the problem with that.
Chair, I recall, and maybe Mr. Cave, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, I may be wrong, memory can deceive us, but well, I think it was you at a previous hearing that, or one of your colleagues anyway, who talked about not taking into account the previous track record of providers.
It was Mr. Devereux.
It was me, and
I think you backtracked on that in letters.
And I subsequently explained it. So we ended up at cross purposes. There have been 2 procurement processes to choose people on the work programme. The first procurement process was to put people onto a framework from whence I could then draw people down on the basis of a second contract. In the first framework thing, one of the conditions we set and tested was, have you performed on previous contracts, whatever your business might be? Because if you remember, my point was we were trying to bring in new entrants, so they weren't all have done welfare to work. So one of the tests we said was, have you performed on previous contracts? I might make an aside
performed
here.
Well.
But performed well, exactly. So this is the performance point I'm making, not the former point, the performance point. Some of the old employment contracts were not difficult to perform well against because all you had to do was run a process, not get people into work. So it wasn't very difficult for people to pass a performance test. The separate point I was making was actually we weren't limiting that to simply performance on employment programmes. So we did that for the framework, and then having got people on the framework, we have now selected people off it through a separate procurement for the work programme.
Of course, the flexible New Deal, just to get it clear, was also an outcome-related we've had an evolution over time, and flexible New Deal was part upfront payment, part process, but also outcome.
Correct. It got up to 80.
So don't make it. It's not that the work programme is magically that different.
No,
Austin.
It's also 2000. It's also 2009. A critical date to keep.
Austin, then Matt.
Now you've just sat through a long closed session, which produced some fairly damning indictments of both the structures and the practices in A4E and in Working Links, and gave several indications of possible fraud. There's some evidence has been submitted to us as well, to the chair, by the people who gave evidence in that closed session. Will those allegations be investigated?
They will be investigated if they're put in front of me. Since it was a closed session and you're alleging that there were damning allegations made, let me simply record for the record
well,
that
it wasn't damning to me. I like that on the record too.
No, I think they did indeed sound damning, and the thing I have asked the committee to consider carefully is to be really clear when you consider them which programme they were talking about and which year they were talking about, because it is not my position to actually argue that past contracts had flaws in them. That is why we have improved, as the PAC would expect us to.
It's not your position to argue that they didn't have flaws in.
Did I miss a negative?
I think you did. But that's what you meant.
But can I just...
Well, hang on. Let me just follow this through, because this is an area of difficulty, because you've got to check, I'm talking about the new arrangements now. You've got to check that placements were in fact secured, that people got to them, that went to them, that they stayed with them. A lot of checking there. You've got to check whether they're part-time jobs or partial jobs or full-time jobs. There's a lot of potential for argument and fraud. You've got to take account of people who would have got jobs anyway, which is bound to be a substantial proportion of the people who go to these agencies. So it is an area of some difficulty.
But
where
I'm afraid
it's essential
you've got that wrong, I'm afraid.
Checks be tight, and you have confidence in the structures of the companies which are doing the placement, and in your ability to check that they've actually been taken up. Now, after what you've just heard, and after the kind of evidence that's, well, been in private eye from time to time, look at the message in today's, where the records for the disabled people New Deal for 2007 to 8 were found on a desk and abandoned on a tip, and they show that there were claims every month for sums between 400,000 and $1 million, for which you were routinely rejecting about 20,000 at a time without investigation. You rejected them, where there was double claiming and all sorts of mistaken claims. Now, that's the nature of the companies which emerges. So are you satisfied, after what you've heard, of their control structures, their audit systems, their propensity to create a culture in which pressure pushes employees lower down the scale into fraud, that these are fit and proper companies to be doing the very important job, and the job which I think is right to do with the new arrangements? Are you satisfied with that those are fit and proper companies?
The most important piece of learning which my department has taken out of their investigation of past contracts is that over-reliance on contractors' internal systems is a mistake. As a consequence, we now have a system where actually it's very difficult to actually get payment out of my department on anything other than evidence which I personally can test. So let me repeat, because it's actually in the report, but I'm not sure everybody's read it. For the work programme, I'm sorry to keep coming back to it, but this is the £5 billion programme you're now worried about. The only way you can get a payment from my department now is first, when you submit the claim, that actually I can demonstrate that the individual you've claimed for has indeed been of benefit for the whole period that you've actually claimed for. Secondly, I then go and check a sample of those against the HMRC's records of whether that individual was indeed in work. If they fail either of those two claims, I do not pay.
That's true, but you've also a vested interest in soft-touch investigation. The question wasn't whether you got new arrangements, it's whether you're satisfied with those companies are fit and proper to do the job.
Just answer yes or no to that one. All you need is a yes or no to that question.
Sorry, I'm answering the way I'm doing it because actually this is the right answer to the question. The answer to the question is actually what controls have I got in place? Right? I've told you the most...
So is A4E fit and proper to undertake the work programme?
A4E is a contractor of ours, and it's subject to the controls that we have put in place, which makes me satisfied as accounting officer that I am not wasting taxpayers' money.
Well, we'll come back to that. Go on, Matt.
Well, Austin and I are brothers in arms on this, because I was going to make the point that ask the question about accountability, because it is incumbent on everybody to ensure that, especially when outcomes are more important, that you can have certainty that those outcomes are accurately being measured.
Correct.
Contrary to some allegations concerning previous systems. And so can you take us through what you changed in the work programme to make sure that you have confidence over that, and which therefore, it seems from your earlier answer, underpins your having less of a handle over the process that the providers need to follow?
Okay, so let me think, which four shall I choose? I think I might choose the following four. We now have a much clearer definition of what the outcome is than we've had in previous contracts. It's fair, as the Chair said, that the Flexible New Deal was getting towards that, but the truth is Flexible New Deal and the work programme have very well defined outcome targets, outcome definitions. So, for example, we are no longer working on, in the New Deal case, the expectation that a job might last 13 weeks, which is open to all kinds of abuse. Secondly, we have reduced the number of contractors very substantially. When the New Deal was at its height, we had 1,300 contracts and 600 contractors. We're now down to 18 contractors and 40 contracts, which means that actually we can put in place a computer system which enables every single one of those transactions to be automatically sent to us by computer, not on great big paper chases.
When did this computer system start?
The computer system started for referrals in the summer of last year, and as we went through in evidence with you last time, the second piece.
I wanted to ask Mr. Cable on this very point. I think this is completely germane. We had an exchange about this, and you said it would be in place by the end of March 2012. I take it that you succeeded in doing that.
I took your wise counsel, Mr. Bacon, not to send you a letter on the 1st of April saying that an IT system had been implemented. It was in fact implemented on the 23rd of March.
Thank you.
4 days ahead of schedule.
And so I'm going through my issues. So 1, clear outcome. 2, far fewer people so that we actually can manage them directly. 3rd, we have a computer system that's in there. And 4th, and this is the really critical piece, when somebody now applies for payment, it's no longer a question of a piece of paper coming in with or without some rubber stamp stamped on it,
right,
which some or other we pay, and then we have to chase and hope that their processes were good. When that referral comes in, and a company says, I would like to be paid for Mr. Devereux, he's done this time off benefit and with this employer, Mr. Devereux, in the case of the Permanent Secretary, gets the computer to say, OK, well, can I just check with my system you were off benefit?
What, that happens in each case or in a sample?
In every single case before any ever payment is made.
So concerns about internal processes, concerns about internal processes are, would you argue that concerns about internal processes are less important because you have that outcome? And therefore, what would be the point of internal fraud within work programme?
You might well ask. So let me finish the last check then. So the check that happens in 100% of cases before payment is made is the one that checks off benefits, right? And in addition, I do hope people are getting all of this because this is quite important evidence. In addition, we check a sample of all of those cases against HMRC records. Right?
Why not all?
Well, because there's a lot of them. So we check them against HMRC records. If any of them fail the employment test, in other words, they don't fail the HMRC ones, then not only do we get recovery of the thing that we've already by then paid, we also gross up that sample and take back the full amount that would be. So if I use an example, there was 100 claims go through, and I find that one of them is wrong, I don't just get the money back on one of them, I get the money back on the whole of that appropriate.
So the incentive is to get it right. For
yes, and so to come back to the critical point you're making about internal processes, what is it now in anybody's interest to say, let's pretend this job exists, because actually, if the job does not exist, it will not pass the employment test. What incentive is there for people to say this person was off benefit? The only person that knows if they're off benefit is me. I'm paying them. So there's no incentive in the system. So actually, my interest in their internal systems consequently goes down because I have taken the controls myself.
On the question of the audit of past systems that you read out part of the written answer, it isn't everybody's view that should for sure be published. But I want to just ask about the relationship between the NAO and you, because if you're going to show that to the NAO, we and the public need confidence that it will therefore be scrutinised properly and appropriately put into the public domain. So I wanted to ask, firstly, whether how much of it you share with the NAO, how much detail, and also the NAO, what you then do with it.
In my view, it's pretty common to show all your workings to your external auditor if they ask for it. That's what they're there for. It doesn't follow, as night follows day, that if the external auditor knows it must be in the public domain. So the answer to your question is the complete audit report on managerial work activity, which is the one we've completed, is already with Amias. He's been talked through it. He can ask me many questions like I'm pausing only on whether, having shown him, it must now be put into the public domain. That was the earlier conversation.
Should I answer? So far we've had 3 reports from this department. We've had the first one on mandatory work activity. We've received that one, and yesterday evening we received the other 2 of the 3 that they've completed. And they are the complete, I can confirm they are the complete audit reports plus one report about the actual fraud investigation into mandatory work activity. Now, normally, obviously, those reports aren't published. What we would do for the committee, if the committee wanted one, would be to do a memorandum that would summarise the key points so that the committee could...
Okay, well, I think some of us would rather have it published. Can I come back to you on the work programme? Because you make these assertions frequently, Mr. Devereux. Let me just take you through another perspective on this. Yep. You've created a whole lot of new incentives in the work programme. So it's a payment by results is the incentive, and that's how providers will make their money. It's a black box of activity that takes place, so you don't necessarily know how they're behaving.
No, sorry, not quite, no, sorry. The procurement process did not specify the process they should go through. The procurement process asked them to say what minimum standards they were.
I understand that, but
I now regard that as contractually binding on them.
So, are you now demanding of them how they treat their clients as well?
Consistent with their minimum standards.
And are you then consistent with what?
Their published
minimum standards.
Their minimum standards. And are you publishing that?
They're published on the website, and sometimes they're as vague as keep in touch with clients.
Okay, can I just carry on? Can I carry on my third, and then we'll come to them. And as I understand it, a number of the companies, indeed the two that we heard evidence from in private, award bonuses to their employees if they place people into work. That's true as well. So that just seems to me, it incentivises employees and companies.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but just to be very clear, I think you'll find that in some of these cases they're paying team bonuses, not individual bonuses. That might be a difference. It might make a difference to your sense of what it is.
Team bonuses or individual bonuses. Some are paying individual bonuses.
Well, they are required.
I think A4E paid individual bonuses. I mean, I don't know if they've stopped, but they certainly did.
For which contract? Again, be very clear. They are required to make sure that the performance management systems must avoid perverse incentives, for example, to falsely claim outcomes. Okay, so the contract.
They're required. We'll come on to the question of how you monitor that. What I'm saying is, if there's a bonus system in place, if it's an outcome based, and if there is less concerned with process, which you say is one of the strengths of the new system, I think all very good incentives, but it creates another set of incentives among providers. Because they will only get their money if they get the outcome. They will only get their bonus if they produce the numbers. And with the best of intentions by DWP, which I have undoubtedly was the case with your predecessors, if Lee Lewis was sitting here talking about his work programmes, he felt as passionately about them as you do today. There could well be an incentive, to cut corners, to portray what they do in the best light, and possibly to cheat or act fraudulently. Those other new incentives exist. And so I think you'd accept with me.
Why would they be paid? They can only be paid if they are off benefit.
Let me just give you two examples.
If they're in work.
Let me give you two examples, Mr. Devereux, one of which I sent you, and you obviously didn't think it was very important.
Is it a work programme example, Chair?
Pardon?
Is it a work programme example?
It's a work programme example. 29th of March 2012. This is a person who went to the Bexley Heath Job Centre. I've actually got it redacted here. But as soon as she, I don't know if it's a he or a she, was referred, they found a job. I was just waiting for my new employer to open a dry cleaners, and I was offered employment. They said I still had to attend a course. I was suspicious of a job that was on their board, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the job, she got the job, didn't have to do anything. And then they wanted her to fill in a form. So I'm saying her, I don't know. They wanted him or her to fill in a form. I said, I'm not filling this in. It makes it look like you got me the job when I already had it. He said, actually, there's a he. He said, it's up to you, but you get £50 voucher sent to you if you do. Mm-hmm. So I did, and I got the voucher in the post. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, the person went into the job. The company, A4E, will get the money. March, they probably won't have got it yet, but they will get the £3,000 having placed on the job. But the point of view of value for money, Mr. Devereux, and our concern with value for money, A4E did absolutely nothing to support that individual into the jobs. And the way you've constructed, what I'm saying to you is the way you've constructed the new contract may have closed off some previous poor practice, but it's created new ones. That's one. Let me give another example, which is a case raised...
Can we do them one at a time, because I won't be able to remember them all simultaneously otherwise?
Well, this person got £50 voucher so that A4E could claim a job outcome.
Okay, whose £50 was it?
A4E's.
Yeah, okay, so I have paid A4E, if this goes through, the rate
for doing nothing.
For the rate we said in the contract for getting somebody...
No, they didn't. They did nothing. This person got the job themselves, but they happen to have got the job just at the point...
Would you like to just engage me then about what sort of test are we going to all have about whether or not somebody helped somebody get into work? Right, it's a right. I mean, if you want to introduce a set of sort of conditions,
no,
that our
concern here, Mr. Devereux, is not the rules you've established, but whether or not there's value of money for the taxpayer. And this is one instance. I'm about to read you another, even worse instance. This is an instance of where the work. You can smile about this. I think this is really serious. There's £5 billion of public money at stake here. If we are providing a work. Pardon? No. There's work. The work provider is claiming for having done work without having done anything. So public money is going into a private provider company without any effort. That's, I agree it hasn't broken your rules. What I said to you is your new rules create new incentives. Let me give the other case.
So I'm sorry, the new deal...
Before we go on to lots of anecdotes, how do you deal with that specific issue? What methodologies have you got in place to make sure that value for money is being looked at in a case like that? I mean, that may be a very atypical case. Well, you have no evidence for that. I'm asking.
So let me go back
what
to
what processes are in place to monitor the contract at that very low level.
Okay, I have to go back a little bit to some of the evidence we gave you last time. Do you remember that a condition of the contract, a condition of these contracts and keeping these contracts, is that the providers demonstrate that they've got 10% more people into work than would have been the case without them? Okay, so the bar to continue with these contracts is they have to beat what would have happened anyway. Okay, so part of my answer to you is actually people are going to get into work, right? Some people will be easy to help, some people won't make it there quite quickly. We've got some relatively tight rules about not putting people on the programme who already have a job. That seems a rather obvious thing to do. There is an area which the report talks about whether or not people who actually get there suddenly find they've got a job offer. Again, come back to the point I was making earlier. I'm not sure that I could very easily contractualise the test, did you help me?
Well,
okay? I've set the prices.
No, you could actually look at process as well as outcome.
One of the things you could do, if you're going to be spending thousands of millions of pounds on helping people into work, it might be helpful if you as a Department of State had some form of way of assessing whether the contractor helped the potential employee into work or not. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I think you just said basically that wasn't possible. Is that right?
No. What I said was that if you're trying to construct a contract which you don't then end up back in front of this particular committee with all kinds of questions about, well, how does that process get adequately checked? We're at least now working on the basis that I have set the prices for this contract based on a detailed examination of 10 years' worth of people moving in and out of work, which includes people who actually, on referral, pretty much get a job immediately. So are
you saying that you set the contract according to the average, the system, even if it means that some people will get out of unemployment the very next day? I mean, obviously not everybody leaves unemployment the next day, otherwise we wouldn't have a problem with unemployment. I mean, that would be a wonderful situation. I understood your answer to say to be essentially a defence of value for money at the level of the contract, as opposed to a defence of value for money for every specific individual.
That's absolutely correct. So the price.
But we don't know, Mr. Devereux, with the greatest respect.
I'm sorry?
We're here. We're sitting around this table. We don't know. Can I raise my other case with you, which
I haven't answered the question.
I'd like to... could you answer my question, which was... Yeah, which was, is your defence that it's the whole contract, and how do you therefore measure the macro, whether the 10%, whether they're doing 10% better than what would have happened otherwise? Because as an economist, I know that what would have happened otherwise is the most difficult thing to work out in the world.
It is indeed, and so the story we took you through last time was that in reaching the contract that we have in front of us now, we did very detailed analysis back over 10 years worth of HMRC data of everybody's movement in and out of work. The 1-day bit, the 6-month bit, the 3-year bit, to try to establish what was the pattern of activity you can expect in a modern economy, against which we could then calculate what sort of price would be appropriate to pay for that produces value for money. In addition, having established that baseline, we've put contractual conditions in that says unless you beat that do-nothing proposition by 10%, that contract is you're at risk of forfeiture. You know, we will ask for it back again.
So at the macro level, to come in, and then I'm going to do my other case, and then I'm going to come back to you guys.
And really, I wonder if I might direct the committee's attention to another point. First of all, I do understand. I think it's perfectly fair, and it does say in paragraph 214 of our report, it's a difficult point. If you had large numbers of people getting attachment payments, just being attached just before they started a job, that would show up statistically. So I don't think it'd be impossible for the department to pick up on it. So there is a potential for that to be exploited, but I do think it would be moderately visible data-wise. So I don't think it's too difficult for the department to control. I'm saying this against the clear view we have in the report that the control environment has improved a great deal.
Yeah.
I would, if I may, don't want to take away your right to reply, but if I may say, I think what will be more challenging on an enduring basis is going to be making sure that when the contractors have published their minimum standards, within those, there's real visibility when there are quite a lot of complaints from the public. The department, in our view, should have visibility of that and should require visibility of it, and make sure that those standards are pretty clear and that as far as possible they comply. And the reason for that is we don't want cherry picking and so forth. And again, I'm saying all this against a background that it is getting better, but nonetheless there are areas here where more work could be done, in my view.
Okay, an observation that it's getting better was true of the entire document. The particular quote you said was that the work programme includes all of the design, contractual oversight assurance controls which we set out as being best practice. So I'm going to consistently come back to... I'm going to consistently come back and defend this because actually that is...
Can you answer the question, Mr. Devereux?
Sorry?
The question was around minimum standards. Yeah. Will you be willing to publish the data around whether or not providers comply with minimum standards?
No, I don't. I'm just trying to test what our practice is.
Our practice is that every month in every contract, our compliance officers examine in detail 25 cases and take them back to the individual and say... Will
you be prepared to publish whether or not private providers comply with minimum standards? Can you just answer? Stop evading and just answer the questions, please.
We're trying to think before we answer. So I think the answer is probably yes, but can I go and think about it?
I was just asking, if I may, sorry, and pardon me, the point I was making was not just should you publish them, fine, that would be, but that you should make a practice of gathering users' complaints to make sure that you get objective information of that, and I don't think it's too much to ask that you might consider that.
Okay, so on a monthly basis, and apart from the 25 cases, we have a routine standing agenda item which is to discuss the complaints that the providers have received. I mean,
do you get them yourselves?
No, well, I don't get them automatically myself. I mean, a standard practice, and you might like to ask the Ombudsman what she thinks is the right way to do this, is for first-tier organisations to get on and fix first-tier problems, and then to have a second tier where things that have not been fixed go. To date, 18 cases out of 750,000 referrals to the work programme have got to the second tier complaint. Now, I'm of the view that if that's the case, I do not have a systemic problem with people worrying about the levels of complaints.
Okay, can I just ask you, what is... the report says that there's a low level of fraud. You know, I mean, I think... What's acceptable fraud? What's an acceptable level of fraud?
Well, what would you think it is?
Well, you tell me. You're the accounting officer.
Okay, well, my view is it reported fraud, and this is a quote from the National Audit Office, is at 0.01%, right? So that's 10,000?
That's reported fraud.
That's reported
fraud.
Well,
we heard from the session before that not necessarily all fraud is reported.
Yes, exactly. So maybe it's a bit bigger than that. My guess is the level of fraud is going to be so small that you might wonder why this is the highlight of our... What is an acceptable level?
Sorry? What is acceptable? I mean, your accounts are always qualified, I accept for fraud on the individual benefit, but fraud here on the provider market, what's an acceptable level of fraud?
What's an acceptable level of fraud? The way Amius looks at my accounts of benefit fraud, he's regarded the current level of fraud at 2% to be too high. We're running a complex system, something in the percent. I mean, this committee has never had a conversation with us, and actually, Lord Fraud and I would like to come back another day and have a conversation with you about.
Well, this is preventing fraud. Can I just raise this one case? We're going to get a vote. You haven't got not.
Before we move on, can I just clarify one thing? This is in paragraph 7. 0.01% of spend. Can the NAO perhaps just clarify? That means 0.01% of spend on the work programme, does it?
No, on employment programmes.
In total?
It's 773,000 over 829 million.
Can I just raise this issue before we get...
So it's all the other employment programmes as well that you were previously rather reluctant to talk about?
Well, there are only...
Now you're praying them in aid to make the number look smaller.
Sorry, this calculation is £773,000 worth of cases where we've identified misrepresentation against an annual spend yes. of 829 million.
Across all programmes?
82% of that 773,000 applied to the New Deal.
Right.
Can I just ask you about this other case that I've got, which is actually from Anne Coffey?
0.
Right. Can I ask... Well, this is reported fraud.
No.
Can I ask this case
there's no reported fraud on the work programme either.
No. Can I ask this case that Anne Coffey, and just to ask how your systems would deal with it? So I accept you, there's a case you haven't seen, she just gave it to me this morning. It's a case of a man who started self-employment a week after he was referred to the provider, which I don't know which provider it is, sorry. This is not an A4E case, okay? This is another one. And they said, will you come and sign all these documents? Because they wanted to claim it as a job outcome. He was reluctant to do so. They then said, well, if you sign all these documents, you will get £2,000 after 6 months self-employment. So he contacted after, he went and he signed all these things, signed and signed and signed. At each meeting, he was told that he would get the money. When he finally said, can I have the money? It, of course, didn't exist. Now, again, I accept this is an individual case, but, you know, I've said to you, I think you've created new incentives which could create fraudulent activity. How would your present new systems work with this sort of a case?
Okay, first of all, I can't see what the fraud against the taxpayer is in that case. I do sympathise with individuals.
Well, the self-employed person is a taxpayer.
Exactly, and he's now self-employed, he wasn't.
No. I think the bad value for money is that the provider did absolutely nothing for this chap, but claimed, I don't know what you get, 3,000, whatever it is, for him.
Let me make a point that we haven't made in this conversation. I do understand the point about what happens if they do absolutely nothing. The contract here is actually designed both to get people into work and to keep them in work. Right? An awful lot of long-term unemployed cycle backwards and forwards in and out of work. You get payments as a work programme provider for sustained work over the period of 2 years. So even if they don't do anything to get him into work, actually if they actually assist him in staying in work on a long period, rather than coming back to at the taxpayer's expense on benefit, that's a good outcome. So one of the reasons why you may think that we're a bit too relaxed about did they do anything to get them in is actually I want them to stay off benefit for a long time. I want them to be in employment for a long time. That is good for growth.
These cases,
but you've got processes to monitor periodically, incrementally over that period until he's considered to be a full-time permanent or she person in work.
Not quite. We pay, for most people after 6 months in work. We are then prepared to pay every month thereafter up to a period of 2 years if in that month they are in work. So actually the incentive is to support people in staying there and not doing what too many people on previous programmes did, which is to go into work, collect the money and then fall back on
So
benefits.
you're saying effectively the cumulative benefit to the taxpayer justifies the fact that it might be a bit flaky at the beginning?
Well, as I've already answered your colleague, I think the aggregate value for money for the contract stands
Meg, very quickly,
on the basis of it. But in this case, it is.
Questions. Will you consider doing unannounced inspections to increase transparency and compliance?
Okay, unannounced inspections.
We're going to come back, actually.
So, are you coming back?
We'll finish that one, but then we are going to come back.
Okay. Unannounced inspections is a perfectly legitimate thing to do where you're worried that all of a sudden investigative material goes away.
It keeps people on their toes, is my point.
It does, but it's a function of investigation. This report is talking about also assurance teams. If I'm sending somebody in to test whether their systems work, it's not self-evident that they need to arrange unannounced. So the only issue I take with this report is it's not distinguishing between two completely different things.
I'm not sure I follow that. This report is about preventing fraud. And you're not seriously suggesting that preventing fraud can't be assisted by unannounced inspections, are you?
No. What I'm saying
then
is...
Ms Hillier is right, isn't she?
No, what I'm saying is if I actually thought that the problem was such that actually I needed to turn up and knock on the door down and quickly get in, that's what I would do. But I've also got a good reason to go back and actually just check whether, for example, all the things they promised to do have happened. And I might actually want to make sure that I turned up at the right place and they had the evidence together. So I'm not trying to make a big thing of this. Where it's appropriate, we will do that. Where it's not, we won't.
Will you consider having a single hotline for people who want to whistleblow or tell you about a problem? For my constituents, so they've got somewhere to go, because at the moment people don't think it's worth complaining.
Okay, I'm less persuaded that makes sense, and for the following reason. At the moment, I do want people participating in the work programme to go to their provider if they have a complaint. If they do not, can I finish? If they do not want to go to their provider, they are seeing fortnightly their job centre, and they expect them to do that.
What the providers do when people complain? If that's where you
don't understand your resistance to that. I think it's a very sensible suggestion.
Well, the main reason is actually people will understand whistleblowing to mean all kinds of things, and if actually what happens is they ring up and say, and I was supposed to have a meeting with my provider, they didn't turn up today. That's a complaint, right? It's not a fraud.
But there might be some genuine.
And as we've discovered ourselves this afternoon, it's important to have a process for whistleblowing to ensure that when there are things that may on the surface look serious, to ensure that they're properly investigated and you get to the bottom of it.
Whistleblowing is typically a concept about staff whistleblowing on their organisation, right? A complaints process.
I mean, the reason why I first wrote to the Controller and Auditor General about how A4E were behaving was because there was no process where the concerns of my constituents who were referred to A4E could properly be dealt with. I just got brush-off letters from them, and there wasn't a process where I could advocate on their behalf. That was not always about fraud, but there is a lack of process.
Okay, well, the process is you complain to your provider. If you get no response to that, you are allowed to go to the independent case examiner, which all benefit recipients are allowed to go to. That is told to people when they go to the benefit centre.
Yes, but
right? But that is a second-tier complaints process.
Okay,
that's what the Ombudsman votes for.
I don't doubt that's a bureaucratic answer, with all due respect. For an average claimant, it gets quite complicated. So
what you really need is phone this number.
Yes, that's right.
We're coming back.
Oh, thank you.
Not first instance.
I shall look forward to it.
Austin has volunteered to take it on, by the way. They'll give you this number.
Can I just ask you about your new systems? Let's get on to your new systems for assessing your new inspection regime. My understand, let's just get the history right again. You've had inspectors in the department since 2009.
Do you mean sort of investigators of allegations?
Investigators.
That sort of investigator?
They've been there since 2009.
No, I think the 2009 you're talking about is the construction of the what we call the provider assurance teams. So these are Alan's teams now.
And who are they? Have they got audit and accountancy qualifications?
No, they are there to assure me that the systems and processes which the organisations are using are sound and are compliant with what was in the bid.
So is this the financial appraisal monitoring team?
It's what took over from them.
Yes.
Right, okay. Admittedly, you've now replaced them, but presumably you then had some sympathy with the comment by one of our earlier witnesses that it was totally ineffective as it was.
But the two things go hand in hand. I mean, the reason, it's not that the financial appraisal and monitoring teams were in themselves ineffective, but they were doing the wrong thing.
Well, quite. I mean, one of the questions that I've never understood is why didn't they look at the internal audit reports? And the answer that the report gives is that you say it was because the information that you might get might vary from one part of the country to another, which sounds like a statement of words, but not really an answer to the question.
I was making a separate point. The reason they were doing the wrong thing was because at that stage, the controls environment was all about pieces of paper, carbon paper, claims for jobs being expected, bits of paper back from employers, and what the FAM teams were there to do was a sort of tick list sampling that those forms had been filled in correctly.
But if you wanted to assess the quality of the control processes, looking at the internal audit report is bound to be informative and helpful, isn't it?
I agree. I'll come to that.
Hang on, Mr. Cave is nodding and saying I agree, and Mr. Devereux is shaking his head.
No, I said we agree.
Yeah. You were shaking your head while agreeing?
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Okay, well,
it's been a long
just need to go outside, get a bit of exercise. Looking forward to your neck, then let us know.
So just explain to me, if you agree, why in 2011, when your team visited A4E, did you not ask for the internal audit reports?
In 2011, I'm not sure that that's the case actually, but
no, 2011, para 3.22 to 3.2.
So this is when the PAC team did. Yeah, I think, can I make a point about the internal audit things? I mean, firstly, I think personally, to put my hand up on this, I think we missed that 2009 internal audit report, and that was wrong. I should have been on the lookout for that because it was referred to in the Work and Pension Select Committee, and I should have somebody coming for that. So I think, as we've discussed, I don't think actually anything in that report materially changes anything that we knew and were on the case for anyway, but we should have got that. And I think that there's some good counsel in the NA report that says we should more systematically make sure that we are understanding what the audit plan is for each.
That's a different thing. Why? Because what actually this bit of the report says, in 2011 you didn't ask for it.
And I'm acknowledging that that was probably something we should have done.
No, you said 09.
You did say that was a fair cough, I think.
No, 09.
Not those exact words, but
I was talking about the 2009 one and going on from that, saying that I think that the NAO makes a fair point that as a matter of routine, we should, every time we start a PAT investigation, as we are doing now actually, check through the audit plan and see which of the internal audits look relevant to the competency of the PAT team. And I think that's a fair call.
This higher level of assurance is obviously going to cost a higher sum of money. Can you say how much more? And in particular, but not only this, the report, that's to say the work programme report that we took evidence on at the beginning of February, refers to the computer system, the management information system, originally budgeted at 4.6 million. And having underestimated the complexity, the budget is now standing at 8.6 million.
He didn't catch it. He's talking about the previous report.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I am. Yes, no, I was making that very clear.
Right.
I know because we had an exchange about it. You're across this, and you told me it started working on the 23rd of March. So I'm hoping you'll be able to tell me how much it cost. Was 8.6 million the final number?
It was a little bit below that, I think.
Right. Okay. And what's the total cost of this higher level of assurance compared on a like-for-like basis, if you can, with the, as it were, rather looser regime?
Well, it's kind of an interesting question actually, because we have moved to a regime which now depends on off-benefit checks, computerised processes, and us taking on board a lot more of the automatic checking. I think we have fewer people needed in the PAT team structure than we had when it was the old FAM team, because on the FAM team we had scores of people chasing around looking at bits of paper.
Because you're worried less about what goes on inside the client provider, inside the provider, you're worried about your checks with HMRC and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
I mean, I've been thinking, I was just talking to the Minister in the lobby about this, about the extent to which one might be able to, and how would you go about defrauding? He said you appointed UBS with the task of asking these sorts of questions. It seems to me the project now, I think one of our earlier witnesses...
A banker. Yes, that's a good idea.
One of our earlier witnesses said if you dangle the carrot, the donkey will move. Well, you've still got a carrot, it's lots of money there. Now, if you were a donkey, how would you go about moving? And it seems to me, since the thing requires not only an upfront payment to be validated, but a sustained payment later when the job has been maintained, you need to convey the convincing impression of a job that's created through the programme or secured through the programme and sustained. So that would be your starting point. And off benefit, yes. And off benefit. So if you were... So obviously you've checked that, you're not paying any benefit. Yeah. So that's saving from your point of view, if you were paying benefit before. But you've still got the issue of whether a company, a provider, is getting these two payments for nothing more potentially, and this is just a potential situation, for nothing more potentially than having created the convincing impression of a job that is sustained for 2 years. Now, every system's open to gaming, and that surely would be how they went about it, wouldn't it?
How would you do that?
Well, I'm not about to go into too much detail in case it gives people too many ideas, but presumably, if you're relatively lowly paid, you wouldn't come to the attention of HMRC because we're shoving up the tax threshold, so a check with HMRC would reveal nothing.
No, it's because it's a P45 check, it's not a payroll check.
Well, on the current HMRC website, it's possible to create your own P45. I was told this by a PAYE journalist recently, and you can just put in what you like. Whether they pulled it down, I don't know, but it was up there very recently. But the fact is, if you were lowly paid, you wouldn't necessarily be paying tax. You might be working black, and the provider's got its money, so they're both happy.
But if you're working black and there's no record in HMRC, you will not get paid.
No, that's right.
Sorry, you mean the provider won't get paid?
Yes.
Yeah. So even if the tax paid by the individual was zero, there would still need to be a record at HMRC with a national insurance number before the person got paid. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
So
okay.
Let me elaborate it to be very clear.
Yeah.
We make an automatic check in the sample with HMRC records. Okay? Just because it's possible, hypothetically, HMRC records aren't wholly correct. If it fails that test, we will then go and seek to find whether there's other evidence of employment.
It is said there are about 75 to 80 million national insurance numbers out there, which is significantly more than the number of people. I mean, I haven't investigated the secondary market for national insurance numbers, but presumably it exists. How would you guard against that possibility?
There are a lot of dead people for whom we still need to know the national insurance numbers because actually their spouse's pension depends on it. Yeah. That's one reason why there's a large number of NI numbers.
But there is fraud as well.
There is fraud, yes. Okay, so I haven't come to tell you that the system we put in place is absolutely foolproof.
No, and I don't
I've come to tell you that it's orders of magnitude better than it was previously, and I'm hoping you're going to be pleased with that.
Yes.
And on that basis, we are checking with HMRC. I can't think of whether it's better to check because they're supposed to know if they're employment. And if the HMRC record is failed, we will go and find an employer.
Yeah.
I agree it might be possible to construct some circumstances we get past all of that, but I'm struggling to think of it.
No, I mean, I appreciate you've tried very hard, and I think what you've got is a clear improvement, which the NAA report does say. So, the direction of travel is terrific, and when we look at this again in 2 years, I'm sure there'll be a nice graph there showing how successful it all was and how much benefit expenditure has gone down.
If you're still there.
And we're all looking forward to that.
I will be.
Marvellous. Well, we'll hold you to that as well. One more question, Chair, if I may. Are providers contractually obliged to tell you if the beneficial ownership of the provider changes, as is quite common in government contracts? So when Emma Harrison resigned as chairman, but she was reported as being, in fact, Mr. Dutton told us she was the 87% shareholder, we can assume in the absence of evidence to the contrary that she continues to be the 87% shareholder. Is that right?
Yes, because if they have a change of ownership, then it is a contractual condition, but we need to agree to that.
Right. Who are the other 4 owners?
I don't know.
You don't know? Is that not a question you'd be interested in? What if they turn out to be people whom the Home Secretary judged were not conducive to the public good and shouldn't be in this country? I mean, it's not a trivial question. I'm asking it all seriously.
I'm not thinking it's a trivial question. I'm actually just trying to reflect whether we would have known it at the time of bid, and I can find out and let you know.
Well, could you send us a note on that? I'd like to know who they are. I mean, I only learned the other day that Sir Robin Young is the chairman of A4E. Is that still correct?
I believe it is, yes.
And do you know if he is a shareholder?
I don't know.
Mr. Devereux, have you had any conversations with Sir Robin about this at all? At any point?
None whatsoever.
None whatsoever. Okay. Thank you.
Ever since you've been imposed?
Ever since I've been imposed.
Okay. Thank you.
Fiona.
Because I thought you might ask me that question.
Pardon? It's just I know the old boy network.
Do you? Well, you don't know this old boy.
The girls are excluded. Didn't you know that? It's a first
The girls are excluded. One of the things that I'm struck by is that in order to improve the ways of reducing fraud, you're depending on one about the process within the company, whistleblowing records and so on. These things aren't actually part of your system, and I'm wondering why you've chosen not to make them part of your system, because it seems to me that that's a deliberate choice, and while the financial outcomes and you making that system more robust than previously might deal with some past frauds, these other things will deal with another kind of fraud, which is the risk of really bad quality provision, the risk, other risks than just a straightforward financial fraud. And I'm wondering why you chose not to bother with that.
Okay, so, well, two answers. One, we haven't chosen not to bother with it because we actually have conversations with them month in, month out about what their processes are and what they're doing. It does come back a little bit to what's the nature of what we're trying to achieve here. What we're trying to achieve here is to get people who've been on benefit for a long time into work, and that's the thing that I prize over everything else. What I'm trying not to do is to specify what sort of process they all go through, quite deliberately. So I'm not trying to be sort of silly about this, but you cannot defraud DWP by some other process if the controls are as good as I've just described.
I understand that, but for example, if that was the only way you tested schools on their examination results, what could happen is that schools could put in fraudulent people to do the exams. I am not suggesting that happens, but what I'm saying is that you can substitute one kind of fraud for another, and I am concerned that by merely having a kind of one-legged stool, you put yourself at risk of other kinds of fraud.
Depends what your analogy is. My view is that I've got very tight control over the checkbook. That would be my analogy. I mean, the people that are coming to this programme have been referred to them by me. I know their name. I know their national insurance number. They were a client of mine. So I'm not going to invent a pupil because I actually sent them there. So when they come back and say, Mr. Devereux's got a job, if Mr. Devereux wasn't referred, I might sort of smell a rat. So, I mean, quite seriously, I'm struggling to think what the obvious fraud is, particularly the sort of stuff you heard this afternoon, would be perpetuated against me. I absolutely take maybe there's a very sophisticated construction.
I just think the diesel washing case in Northern Ireland where the HMRC said this is absolute nonsense. It would be physically impossible to do diesel washing to get rid of the red diesel on the scale required. Yeah. So it's not something we really take seriously as a big risk. And then about a week or two later, there was a story in the Times newspaper about a diesel washing operation on a scale which simply staggered all the HMRC officials. So I suppose...
So let's be complacent. I agree with that. I mean, there may be things and we need to keep alert, right?
Yes, and are you therefore, is your mindset, therefore, eyes in the back of your head, looking around you, scanning the whole time?
Yes. It is, and I think one of the things which we need to do on the back of the NAO report, and I think it gives us some good pointers actually, is to think about how our various bits of control mechanism in terms of teams are configured, and I think they all do a very good job. I think they're excellent actually. The current configuration is designed for the transition process which we've been through to get from old world to new world. I think they've done that very well. I think there is a case, and I think you sort of make it implicitly, that maybe now is the time to have a bit of a look and see, with an eye to the future and with an eye to look round as many corners as possible, do we need to kind of tweak or look at some of the structures?
Is that to look at this thing that I've been banging on about bringing people who know a little bit about money in, so auditors or accountants?
Well, we have, we're not short of auditors or accountants.
Not in your... You said you had them in your inspection, you had them in the team that went in to look at A4E, but have you got them in your performance, whatever you call them?
In the provider assurance teams, we do not routinely ask for auditors.
Yeah.
So one of the recommendations in this is we should think about the skills. We agree.
Yep.
You agree?
Yeah. I mean, we need the team to be adequately. So I don't need everybody to do it. These are helpful suggestions that will help us be...
If you're not careful, we're going to sing the departmental song together.
One of the things that this government has said, and actually I think there's a really quite serious point in this, which is increased transparency can mean that the citizen plays a role in auditing the quality of a service. And that if they can see what's going on, the customer... Now, I accept that the problem is here we've often got a reluctant customer, the workless person. But nevertheless, what's really struck me about the contact I've had from people is that very often there are a large proportion of these customers who are not reluctant, who are actually very keen on getting into work, and who are very keen that the public's money is properly spent and feel that what they're seeing isn't spending the public money properly. Now, I looked at the Department of Work and Pensions Select Committee's report on the old system, and it said that the black box applies only to how customers are helped by providers. It never applied to auditing or to the treatment of subcontractors. And the department has also specified in the commissioning strategy, and I noticed that the commissioning strategy, which was extant then, is still on your website, that its assurance processes would ensure that the hardest to help were offered a good service by providers. One of the things that I keep saying on this committee is that value for money is that people get good value, as well as the taxpayer's pound is spent frugally. And I'm concerned that as well as fraud, we have some examples here of very poor value, which is where the gaming of the kind of, you know, I'll give you 50 quid if you fill in these forms, which is the kind of gaming which the new system risks, or £2,000 indeed, because they can still make quite...
But I would have to say there is more transparency in this programme, these contracts, than any of its predecessors. All of the terms of the contracts are out there on our website. Never had that before. The minimum service levels, you may have criticism about them, but they are out there.
Wouldn't it be a good idea to have a minimum service standard that was universal?
No.
Who would define it, and why would it be right?
Well,
that's the answer to that question.
Why don't you look at the minimum service standards, which are very diverse between the different companies? And actually, in some ways, A4E's is better than many, because it's more specific. So what conclusions do you draw from that? One of the things that I think is that I think that you should establish some minimum service standards which were perhaps universal. I understand why you didn't do that at the beginning of the programme. Fair enough. I think giving people a chance to go for minimum service standards at the beginning of a programme can create more competition.
The conversation I really don't want to have in 2 years' time is with a provider that says, my performance would have been so much better if you hadn't insisted that I put those minimum standards in. Because that would have just sent us back so far. That would be a terrible retrograde step.
So you think it's fine that some contractors have minimum standards which mean that they can be 3 hours journey from someone who hasn't got a car?
If that was what they bid for, and if that's what they think is consistent with getting more people into work and keeping them there, yes.
I mean, at the end of the day, we have thought very hard about incentives here. I mean, in Figure 12, there are examples of what individual providers have actually chosen to do, even in respect of something called meeting with personal advisors. Even the ones that have specified a minimum standard, they cannot agree about what that should be. I just don't see why you would imagine that Alan Cave's judgment about the minimum standard is a necessarily good thing to do.
Let me just...
Thank you.
No, he's a good chap.
I mean, I think
hypothetically.
On the current evidence before us, you're a very impressive performer, but have you found that the fact that lots of different providers have looked at different ways of doing it has thrown up new ways of working to improve the ability of providers to get people into work? It's a really good
question, actually, Martina. I think that is beginning to happen. I think the key to success of the work programme is that they use the flexibilities in the contractual arrangements plus the much more real-time performance information which they now have, because they're there and they can understand which interventions work better for which groups and getting them back to work faster.
So why don't you share that?
Can I finish? They use that combination to innovate and change and flex. Now, I think cutting across that with a state-imposed set of minimum processes is antithetical to that dynamic, which I think is how you get improvement.
But can I just ask, I've got to do with what you say in that, but that's different from, and if I can just complement what you were saying, Fiona, so what about just saying, well, what we're going to do is we're going to keep on expecting them to say how they're going to improve, because they put these in, as they put their hand up, as they bid for the contracts, they didn't know what it was going to be like, they put their bids in, well, okay, rather than saying let's have a one-size-fits-all, which I can understand what's wrong with that, but nothing wrong surely with your saying to them, well, look, we're going to want to be talking to you about how you're going to improve these standards of service over a steady period of time, so you're clear, you're more focused, it's clear what you're saying, people better understand the deal. Now, you know, unless you think you got it all right first time, I would have thought that made some sense.
No, we don't think that, but remember the structure of this contract. I mean, at the moment, we are paying people to be attached to the programme, but that's not a job outcome, that's just you referred to attached. That payment is going down in each of the next 3 years, right, and eventually will be zero, so after that it'll just be on our account. They're going to have to get better. They're going to have to get better just to keep their cash flow going.
They've taken 8.6 million out of the company and they can run off with it.
They could go bankrupt, and the consequence of going bankrupt would be that I would not have paid the taxpayers' money for outcomes I didn't get.
But people might not be in work.
Already pocketed it now.
Well, we've put another provider.
And to date, the evidence of most of the employment programmes prior to the work programme is that they haven't actually achieved very much. So actually we need to achieve more, otherwise we will continue with long-term unemployment.
I'm really not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying there's nothing wrong with, given you're meeting them so often, having a discussion and saying to them, you know, there are elements in this which, you know, we'd like to see clearer and better articulated. Let's talk about it.
I think that's fine, and I think the only rider I'd put on it is as long as that's a discussion linked to performance. Because I want to know,
yes, absolutely.
I want to know what they are doing to improve service levels, such as to get more people back to work.
No, I agree.
Okay, so I mean, on that basis, I've got
one discussion which could link to performance is you could require every supplier to have targeted at their staff, having listened to Mr. Targeted at their staff a whistleblowing procedure that was publicly available.
If it's for staff,
to their staff.
That is a requirement now.
It is a requirement. Are you confident that the staff of these companies know that? Because that's not what I'm hearing from people.
That is something which the PAT teams, as they go through all of the work programme providers, will investigate and look at, and if they find they are not getting...
pre-announced investigations, so the posters are up nice and noticeably while you're there, Mr. Cave.
I think...
we keep hearing from people that they don't know about how they can complain, and they have bullying managers who prevent complaints. Now, I accept that you haven't been able to investigate all of these, but one of the things that I've learnt as an MP is that people, you know, you get greening complainers, but when from all ends of the constituency you get the same complaint, there is something that you should be alert to.
So
and one of the things I'm very struck by is the number of people who have worked for these companies who say that bullying management means that there isn't a way that they feel that they can safely make complaints when they are asked to do things, and we have had evidence of people who have been asked to do things which include making up evidence and telling lies. Now, we haven't been able to test that evidence in a court of law, but nevertheless it is quite perturbing that people feel that that's what they've been asked to do, and that there's no way they can whistleblow about it.
So let me come back to the rather important point I made earlier. In the evidence you heard, we were swishing around the years, okay? And it has been the case that some of the things you've heard...
I'm talking about evidence that we have heard about the period of the work programme of someone being asked to lie.
In respect of the work programme?
It wasn't in respect of the work programme, you're quite right, you were sitting here, she was talking about a different programme, but it was in this period, and therefore she did not know how to complain. There was no... While you're right, the programme that she was asked to lie about was not the work programme. If she had known of a safe way of passing it up, that would equally apply to people who worked on other programmes at that time in that company.
I'm going to just check something and then drop you a line, because I think some of these providers have actually established independent confidential helplines. They're not whistleblowing to staff, they're whistleblowing outside the organisation. I'd like to check that before I quote it.
Some of them.
Well, I have evidence a provider who I think is doing this, but...
And can you tell us how many uses of these so-called independent web lines have there been?
If we know, I will happily tell you.
Could you send us a note and in it state how many providers there are in total under the work programme? 80? 18. It's 18 prime contracts, isn't it?
No,
right.
18.
And of those, how many have established this independent confidential
I think we're coming to an end.
Helpline, and how many haven't?
Austin, then I think I've got a couple to sweep in at the end.
Well, I'm not sure you're coming to an end when you bring me on. I mean, I think Mr. Devereux is right that one of these companies could go bankrupt is about equivalent to the Government of the Bank of England saying moral hazard could discipline the banks because they might go bankrupt too, or they're too big to fail. It's so unlikely. I mean, here is a new category of capitalism which is set up to milk the state.
It's happened in Australia. It's happened in Australia.
The competition of the market, it's got a safe contract, which just goes on. So the threat of bankruptcy is really hypothetical. Just let me ask, though, why, when there have been all these complaints, let's not take A4E, because we consider them a bit. Let's take the other one, the working links. There've been a number of disreputable things happened to working links. A lot more revealed when the papers for the disabled work scheme are dumped on a tip for public exposition. It's a curious filing system, but it did bring things out into the open that we didn't know about. And you'd had compliance visits which had proved fraud in several of the local organisations. So here is a case against working links, which is obviously badly organised and badly run. And yet, at the end of the day, when you get in this new scheme, and I think this new scheme is a good idea, actually, you know, because payment by results is a good way of doing it, very sensible. But you tend to infer that getting people a job actually drives out all other considerations when you're saying that's the prime objective. Why was a company with that record and that structure reappointed to the new system, because it's now running the system in Wales?
Okay, so I heard in the closed session evidence that dated back to 2008, 2007. That's what the gentleman sitting in my seat seemed to be saying. The process that we talked you through, by which people got onto the work programme, was a process by which we checked whether, in that point that we were doing it, we had concerns about their fraud thing. So I've deliberately said several times now that the process pre-2009 frequently was problematic, partly because it's a paper chase with dodgy definitions, but also because I don't think there was systemic segregation of duties. So if I am the person that puts you into work and I'm the person that makes the claim to DWP, there's all kinds of sort of incentives and opportunity for me to do that. If you introduce segregation of duty, actually that becomes a different thing. Now, that's what the colleague sitting next to you was talking about, because most of his evidence of fraud was actually things that have been trapped in the company. So my view is that these companies have been on a journey, and I'm not in any way going to condone poor behaviour in a period when actually they had the wrong systems. Right?
Did you have a lot of competition? Did you have a lot of choice between them?
Contracts. Just taken away the contract for mandatory work.
I have, but not for fraud, right? So I'm trying to be clinical in my answers here.
But hang on a minute.
I'm sorry?
Was there a lot of competition to take up the contract?
There were.
Yeah, there was a lot of competition.
Mr. Devereux, I know every perm sec arrives and says it was all rubbish before me and it's all going to be brilliant since I'm there. You're pretty normal in doing that. I've tried to say this before, but from our point of view, actually we look at past expenditure. I try and haul back perm secs who may have moved around government to haul them to account so that they become both accountable as well as where they've been responsible. Lee Lewis, whose record you're attacking, has left. It's a bit more difficult because he's left the civil service. But I mean, I think all of us who knew him think that he was a very, very upright, passionate, committed individual. Now, if you discover the whole thing about A4E is that you accepted, I think earlier. Let me just say one other thing: is you talk about those allegations going back to 08, 09. Some did. Some of them are since on your watch. Some of them have been 11, 12. And the people who we had before us, I don't know when you joined actually, maybe it wasn't on your watch, maybe it certainly was on Alan Cave's watch, but they've certainly been during this period of government. But our job anyway is to look at allegations whenever they occurred. Yes. I will look at one that goes back to 2001, 2005. And I just want to ask you this, if it is found that A4E have committed a fraud in one of these many cases that you're looking at, will you at that point reconsider whether or not they're a fit company to undertake the new work programme, whatever the controls you've got on that work programme.
Okay, so these companies have got contracts with us. We have made perfectly clear that, like you, we will look back as far as we need to examine some of these frauds. The question we will be asked as a matter of law to do with contracts is whether the action we take is reasonable. So if I found in 2008 there was a case, which, by the way, we may well have recovered the money for, it may well not be reasonable under law to take a contract off them for it, right? So if, on the other hand, what we find out is actually there is, despite everything we've been saying, fantastically sort of systemic problems which persist to this day, then actually, or everything you've heard government ministers say is actually, yes, we would take the contract off them.
And how are other alternatives available? I mean, is there competition for these contracts?
Yes.
Sure. So this is an important point, Michelle. At all. There was competition for the market, competition to get onto these contracts.
Yes.
Okay. Remember, these contracts at the moment, every region has got at least 2 and sometimes 3 providers. They're currently getting random allocations of customers, say 50% each. In 3 years' time, if it turns out a provider A is doing better than provider B, they will get more work than provider B. So actually, even in situ, even with this contract, it's a wasting asset if they don't perform.
I'm not worried about you're not finding alternatives, because I agree, I think there is I am interested in what is your definition of systemic? What is it? What is it that has to be shown for you to say no more?
I'd probably have to think about that and drop you a note. Systemic to me talks about the very way in which the company is run. Right?
Well, I think that's what we got evidence on. Actually.
No. What you've got evidence on is the past, right? And so be very clear.
But that was the systemic, way the company is.
Company culture.
Yes, okay, but companies like individuals may change, all right?
We've just established that they haven't changed, and that indeed, were the beneficial ownership to change, you would have had to have been notified.
Well, sorry, you're making a very simple elision between some past facts and contemporary culture, leaving out the fact that actually, consequent upon those past facts, we change some of the processes.
You can't have some of the culture
you've observed.
Who sat here and gave very credit. I know we can't talk about it because it was in private. Was there? They both were there between 2011 and 2012. This wasn't massively in the past, Mr. Devereux.
That's not actually accurate.
They were.
No, it's just not. One
they
left
were.
in May 2011, so wasn't there in 2012. But more importantly, this is as we discussed. It needs to be investigated. Would you agree? And investigated properly, and then come back to it.
And as I say, I know you're going to tell me you were interested in everything, but that was an audit of not an employment programme.
Sorry?
The auditor didn't work for an employment programme. But, I mean, we will look at if anything that you have found.
Within the organisation, this is where I have to say to you, it may not be, I understand your, I would simply ask you to work across government, because our interest here is it doesn't matter whose contract it was.
Our consistent position has been, if you have any information, let us know, and we will put professionally qualified
we've given you
investigators.
information, and I hope you're going to come back to me and talk about the ones where you felt you didn't have enough information.
I will bring an investigator around.
Pardon?
I'll bring an investigator around.
Right. Okay, and then can I just say one final thing? Is a public sector contract to build sort of houses or hospitals or schools is pretty straightforward, right? It's pretty straightforward, and I think payment by results, the school is there, you've got, you can keep a little bit of money back to make sure if anything's gone wrong that you get it back. A contract that provides human services, I think, would you accept that's qualitatively different? And it only will work if you build trust, really. I think that's the key thing, that there's got to be trust in the system. And it's partly about the outcome, but it's also about how well, which is the Fiona point really, how well customers are treated. That has to be part of the mix in these sort of contracts. So it's about how as well as the how much. I hope you accept that. And if I put to you that I think trust has broken down here, particularly in relation to A4E, how do you feel that you can rebuild it?
Well, first of all, I do agree that services to individuals are important. Any company that thinks they will be successful as a company if they are not having trusting relationships with their clients is probably making a mistake. So the idea that somehow or other that I can have a company that continues to be very successful in getting people into work but actually has no constructive relationship with them, I think is a bit difficult. imagine just for a minute, just hypothetically, that they were successful in getting long-term people into work without necessarily the friendliest of relationships. I'd still be quite pleased with that outcome, because I don't really want them on benefit, because I'd rather they were in productive employment.
Yeah, well,
so
you don't,
I agree it would be nice if the relationships were positive, and I suspect that positive relationships will add to their ability to get people into work. But that's sort of where I would pause, and I don't actually think that what I've heard is actually that lots and lots of A4E customers have lost trust. As I said to you earlier, 11 cases out of 750,000 referrals have actually made it to the second tier. And I can assure you the second tier complaints is a really easy thing to do, because I read them all the time on the benefit side of the house. So, there is a sense in this committee, I fear, that actually, we've decided beforehand that this thing is systematically wrong. Right? You're nodding. I've decided it is.
So, what's systematically wrong?
No. No. Okay. No. Okay.
What within A4E?
No. So just across the piece, there's a sense here that actually, I'm asking, all I'm inviting you to be a little bit clinical about when the evidence you've seen, what changes we have made, what changes the companies may have made. By all means, keep testing on us, because we aren't perfect. But I would like to end by just concluding it's in one sense how nice to come up as an accounting officer to find that the NEO actually thinks I've done the right thing.
Okay.
They don't always say that to me, as you know.
Well, I don't ignore the evidence that we have.
Used to do is what it says.
And other departments, it doesn't matter, it's probably a conversation for elsewhere, but I have to say to Mr. Devereux,
the allegations you've had, not the evidence you've had.
The allegations we've had, the way in which the DWP tends to deal with these allegations as compared to other departments of government who are also making contracts with private providers to provide, whether it's education services or health services, is qualitatively different. And there's a greater openness to looking at whether your systems, that's my experience. That is my experience. That you never actually are prepared to say, hang on a minute, this might mean that there's a bit of a system here that we ought to investigate and see whether or not it's right.
If we had not thought that, we would not have invented the programme that's in front of you today.
Well,
we would have sat on the New Deal, we'd have sat on 600 providers, 1,300 contracts.
We were all political parties were going towards what has become known as the work programme. This is not a great, it was, as I keep saying, it was an evolutionary,
That's evidence from the report which I quoted.
Yeah, it's no great revolution, it was an evolution that had consented.
It's not the way that it reduces fraud by requiring outcomes rather than processes.
There were no pre-permit
because the fact that it's entirely outcomes based.
There were no pre-what, sorry?
The level of automatic checking was not the same as we have now, right? So I'm able to make these statements with which you would wish I had some other things to say, because actually we've invested in the system. The system that we turned on, that you keep asking about, has just been turned on. It did not pre-exist.
I'm not sure it's value for money. But
these borders means that you can check our
the value for money question goes back to our earlier hearing, if I might say, because that's the point that Matthew's made.
Right.
Sorry. I knew it was going to be long.
Are we finished?
Yes, thank you.